I solo queued to Iridescent in less than 24 hours of playtime, and here are 5 things that I learned that I'm confident will help you if you're someone who plays solo in Black Ops 6 ranked play. If these tips help you out, like and subscribe, and let's get into the video. Tip number 5, and I need you to hear me out on this one, is to keep your cool. Now, don't get me wrong, it's super frustrating to solo queue in general, but the absolute worst teammates that you can get are the ones that are always typing, always talking bad, and always blaming the team. What you need to understand is that you aren't going to win every game, your teammates won't always hard carry, and that has to be okay with you. That's unfortunately what you signed up for when you decided to solo queue. So don't take it out on the team because that only hurts your chances of turning the game around and winning. The same thing goes for when you run into a 4-stack or like ranks that are way higher than yourself. There's so many people that give up way too early. Like actually earlier today or last night, I had a teammate try to forfeit after we lost an offensive round of control. Like especially on Volt, you're not supposed to win offense. Your goal is to get as many ticks as possible. So basically the mindset that that player has is stopping them from ever winning any control when they spawn on offense on the first side because they lose the round, immediately give up, and then try to forfeit. So I promise you, a game like Call of Duty is all about mindset and confidence. So you need to do everything that you can to keep those as strong as you can while you're solo queuing. De-escalating is also a good skill to have while solo queuing because you will run into teammates like the ones that I just described, and you'll need to find a nice way to tell them that it's going to be all right and to keep trying until the game's over. I can recall plenty of times in the mini series that I've done solo queuing to Iridescent, very specific instances of having to turn my mic on and tell people to either stop yelling at each other or just get along until at least the game's over.
Shut the fuck up. Stop talking. I literally carried you.
Who? We lost
that round.
We didn't even break 100.
Double negative.
Hear me out, guys. Hear me out. Let's be friends for 10 more rounds. Let's be friends for 10 more rounds, and then we can talk shit, okay? Let's go. See? And it's really not hard to do. The tricky thing is just not getting sucked into the toxicity, or at least waiting until the game is over before joining in on it. Because if you spend the whole game yelling at your team, or your team spends the whole game yelling at you, you've essentially already lost at that point. So you might as well get along at least until the game is over. We'll go over this a little bit more in my very last tip for this video, which I believe is the most important. But one thing I want to talk about now is to focus on the common denominator between all of your ranked games, and that's you. A ton of people come into my stream asking for help solo queuing, and a lot of their reasoning is that they're always hard carrying their teammates, or that the teammates that they're given are horrible. But in reality, your teammates are out of your control, and if that's your focus on how to get better, you're never going to get better. If all you're doing is sitting around and playing the same game, waiting for better teammates, essentially whether you win or you lose is on Call of Duty's matchmaking and not on you. And I think it's a lot easier to think that way because it's way easier to blame the game or blame your team instead of blame yourself. But I promise if you look at your own gameplay, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, like I said, you'll have a much better mindset going into ranked play. And tip number 4 is to be aware of the minimap. This is one thing that I brought up in one of my last solo queue videos to Iridescent. There's like a lot more to watch. If you're solo queuing and you're not in the comms with your teammates, you really need to have a close eye on the minimap to see like what's open, what's not. Because they're not going to tell you in the comms. They're straight up just not going to let you know. Like I picked out the back spawn there. I remember specifically being on a Hacienda P2 and making note of how much I was watching the minimap. When you're playing with a 4-stack or you're in comms, you'll usually have somebody say that, hey, your lobby is clear, nobody's hitting your elbow, or let's say somebody's watching your front, or somebody comms that they have your water. And that gives you the opportunity to mentally eliminate those areas from where opponents will be coming from, at least until your teammates die. When you're solo queuing, you usually don't have comms and you don't have the leisure of knowing where people aren't going to be coming from. This is what I mean when I say you have to be extra aware of the minimap. Since your teammates won't be able to tell you what they're watching, you have to figure out what they're watching for yourself. So if we're talking that same P2 example on Hacienda, on the minimap I see somebody is watching lobby, so I'm going to assume that my elbow is clear. Assuming I also have teammates blocking the back spawn, this allows me to only focus on front and my water. And that is way more feasible to hold from the hill time instead of having to worry about 4 different angles that opponents could be coming from. Now the flip side of this, especially while solo queuing, is just because it looks like somebody has an angle for you doesn't mean they actually do. There was another search and destroy game where I assumed that my teammate had the P2 flank when I was on rock, actually on Hacienda as well. And even though my teammate was in the spawn, they were not watching the flank. I don't know how that happened, but that's just how solo queuing is. So like I said, the flip side is just because it looks like somebody's holding an angle doesn't mean they actually are. There's really no way to truly factor for that while you're playing, but on a fast-paced game mode like Hardpoint, in the example I just went over, you're probably safe to assume that they do have elbow. Let's say somebody gets through and shoots you on the side. It's really not the end of the world. But from my perspective, holding the hill, it's a way more simplified hold if I just go ahead and focus on front and water anyways, rather than having to go back and forth between all 3 angles. If you're newer to Call of Duty or you're trying to improve, a lot of people also ask how often to look at the minimap. It's honestly one of the most important tools in all of Call of Duty. It's the first thing that I look for off spawn. I'm constantly watching it after waves of kills to see where my teammates are spawning, because that means your opponents are going to be spawning on the opposite side. And truthfully, for the most part, especially on Hardpoint, the minimap is going to be the key to understanding the game. Even more so when you're solo queuing, kind of because of what we talked about earlier. If you know that you're bad about looking at the minimap, one thing that you can do is go to your multiplayer HUD presets and choose magnified. I do like square and the scale of 127. Then also go to your safe area and move it more towards the center of your screen. Horizontally, I like to go all the way in, and vertically, I like to go about halfway in. This makes it so that you don't have to look as far to see the minimap. It will hopefully give you a more constant reminder of how important it is to be keeping track of. Tip number 3 is to be able to adapt. Because your teammates change every single game while you're solo queuing, that means you can't play the same way every single game. Unless, of course, you can completely take over, but that's not likely for every single game. So for adapting, I'm going to break this down into 3 more points. Number 1 is going to be holds. We were already talking about like a P2 Hacienda a little bit earlier. If you're keeping your eye on the minimap, this should allow you to determine which areas of the map are open. And if we keep this example on P2 Hacienda, let's say your team got wiped or you got killed and your team's holding the hill. If you spawn in the back and you're the only one off spawn, it's actually your job to stay in the spawn and hold it. This includes if you have a submachine gun. This includes if you've been playing the hardpoint hill up until that point. Your job as the last one off of spawn is to make sure that you maintain the back spawns. If you're not emphasizing what the best move is for your team, then it's really easy to fumble the good spawns and accidentally give them to the other team. But this is very much paired with minimap awareness and just general knowledge of the game, making sure that your positioning on the map is what's most beneficial to the team. And the second part about adapting is actually play style. Now, the P2 hardpoint on Hacienda is a super simple example, the one where we talked about earlier where if you're last off spawn, you need to block the spawns. But on game modes like Control and Search and Destroy, there are different play styles that need to be picked up. Let's say if you're playing Rewind, Search and Destroy, or some other Search and Destroy map, if you have 4 SMGs on the map, it's going to be pretty difficult to win, especially if you're pushing a lane with longer angles like you're trying to go BS&D on Rewind. If you look around and see 3 other SMGs, it's time for you to pull out the AR, even if it's not your best. Try to get in the more long-range engagements like the head glitches on top of bomb or the back truck. This is something that not everybody keeps in mind, and you might be the only person that notices it. So if you're noticing too many SMGs or too many ARs, you can either switch yourself, or kind of like how we talked about earlier, you can kindly say in the match chat or the game chat that somebody probably needs to switch if it's going to be best for the team. Now, 9 times out of 10, if you tell somebody to do something, they're probably not going to do it. But if you present it in a nice enough fashion, or maybe leave the question a little more open-ended, it could be really helpful to your team. But your best bet, honestly, is to make the change yourself. And the last point I want to make on adapting is spawn knowledge. This goes hand in hand with holds, with minimap awareness. But when you're not playing with a 4-stack and you're playing solo queued, the spawns are going to flip way more often than they normally do. And that's why it's extra important to keep an eye on the minimap and just know where your teammates are. Because if you get a weird spawn or your teammate gets a weird spawn, you need to adapt to that right away and either turn around, change your positioning, or fully be ready for your opponents on an area that you once thought was clear. There's a red card hardpoint I played during my solo queue series that made me think of this. Typically, when you're playing P3 on red card, you want the top mid spawn so you can trap your opponents in the garage. But for whatever reason, during this P3, my team was blocking the garage spawns, the worst spawns, and I found myself trapped front bus with people on all angles. Now, if I defaulted to my typical red card hold, I would be expecting the opponents to be in the back, but I could already tell from my team's positioning that that wasn't going to be the case, and even if I did push out the proper spawns, they probably wouldn't flip to the bad ones just because my teammate was staying there. So instead, what I tried to do is hold off the opponents from going to the front of time, kind of finessing and playing my life on the outer bus. It was really weird, to be honest, and not a hold that I've ever done on P3 red card, but that kind of makes the point that I'm talking about, is being able to adapt and to know what's best for the team in that point of time, even if it's not flipping spawns to the optimal ones. Just trying to be as beneficial as you can with your current positioning. Tip number 2 is communication and pings. Because obviously you're solo queued and not everybody has microphones, you really have to make the most of whatever communication you can get. So if your teammates have game chat, great, definitely utilize that. And I would continue to use all the points that we've talked about up until this point, like keeping calm, keeping your cool, staying aware of the minimap, and being ready to adapt. If you factor that into your communication, you can make the game infinitely easier on your entire team. Going back to that P3 red card we just talked about, if you have a team that has mics on and is willing to listen, you could calmly tell them to leave the garage area because you want your opponents to spawn there, which would eventually flip them out and make the hill a lot easier to hold for your team. One thing I'll say is, even if your teammates don't have mics or don't talk to you, you can still relay helpful information to them or leave your mic on. Just kind of like I said earlier, don't lose fool or rage at anybody that makes a bad play or anything like that, because that's not going to help your team. And even if you're not actively slaying out or getting a ton of kills, you can still tell your team what you're holding and what they need to hold and where your opponents might be coming from. This is all really beneficial information that doesn't necessarily involve you getting kills. Now, when it comes to pings, if you don't have your mic on or if your teammates are comm banned or something like that, one setting that I like to go to is actually in the overlay advanced settings, and you want to turn the hold delay, I think is what it's called, off. This makes it so that if you're somebody who's trying to ping a ton, you won't accidentally pull up the scrolling wheel where you go between the different types of pings. You'll either have the normal ping or the danger ping if you double tap. And since I bind my left paddle to my ping button, this makes it super easy to communicate with my team. If I see somebody or want them to hold something, I can simply ping it for them, and that's better information for the team. And the final tip, tip number 1 that I was talking about a little bit earlier, is actually to focus on yourself. You are the only common denominator when you solo queue. If your reasoning for why you're not great at solo queuing is entirely based on your teammates, not only only is that probably not true, it's also a pretty unhealthy way of thinking about solo queuing in the first place. Like I said earlier, you are the only common denominator in your solo queue lobbies. If you're truly trying to get better and you're focusing on anything other than yourself, that's simply not going to yield results. One thing to keep in mind is that there's likely always something that you could have done differently or could have done better to turn a losing game to a winning game. Now, there are some situations where that's not the case. You have like a teammate lag out or your opponents are just really, really good. But for the most part, the healthiest way to think about solo queuing is to focus on what you could have done differently to either win the game or perform better in the game. For myself, one of the things that's helped me the most is watching back my own VOD and thinking more from an objective top-down perspective, what I could have done differently in the moment. A lot of times when you're in game, it's super hectic or it seems like there's a million things going on. If you watch back your own gameplay and try to simplify it, it makes it way easier to determine if there's something you could have done better or a lesson that you can learn for the next game. And those are my 5 tips for solo queuing on the multiple times that I've solo queued to Iridescent. If this video helped you out, again, like and subscribe. Let me know if you want me to do more videos like this down the road. Thank you again for watching, and I will catch you next time at lunchtime.